I'm going to hand straight over to Tina Woods and also Gavin Starks, who will give a very brief introduction to the APPG for Longevity's Open Life Data Framework. So over to you, Tina and Gavin, and thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much, Richard. Yeah, so very good to be here today. I'll be very brief and hand over to Gavin pretty quickly. So just to mention, some of you will already have seen that we launched the Open Life Data Framework actually yesterday. I think Richard will send the link to the report. It is for your viewing if you haven't seen it already, including the recommendations. Launched it yesterday with George Freeman, our Science, Research and Innovation Minister, doing the keynote and also contributing the foreword. Do have a look at the report, and obviously our three case studies will be coming on very shortly that have been the focus of the report. This started as an ongoing, as a project actually started last year on behalf of the APPG, focused on our mission of extending healthy life expectancy by 5 years while reducing health inequalities, was one of the key recommendations in the Health of the Nation strategy published in February 2020, and actually set out in the Lancet at the same time we published our Leveling Up Health report in April this year. We've involved well over 100 experts and organizations. The working group was chaired by Lord O'Shaughnessy, who presented the report yesterday, and very deliberately involved organizations and expertise outside the health and care system, recognizing that 80 to 85% of the determinants of our health actually lie outside the care we receive by our doctors and hospitals. Hand over to, we'll take you through the critical insights and developments outside health that has guided our thinking in the development of the framework to create the enabling conditions for public and private sectors to design and implement and facilitate trustworthy data sharing for public benefit while achieving our goal of the 5 extra years of healthy life expectancy while minimizing health inequalities. The whole purpose of this is to stimulate conversation, encourage collaboration between the public and private sectors. And actually, one of the big things that we focused on is actually the definition of what is actually health data. So we have taken the use of the term health relevant data and looking specifically at private sector derived health relevant data. But suffice to say, we are already in discussion about the next stage with partners to go through and take this to the next stage. Anyone who's interested, please do contact obviously myself or Gavin and through the Secretariat for the APPG. So I'll stop there and hand over to Gavin.
Thank you, Tina, and hello everyone today. My name is Gavin Starks. I think part of our reflection here is that our digital world continues to expand exponentially around us. And so we must take steps to both protect our rights around usage of our data, but also to enable the data to flow to deliver better outcomes. And so the framework here, really, we're trying to put control of the data generated in the commercial sector in the hands of the user, which they are legally entitled to under GDPR and related frameworks, while facilitating trust across the data ecosystem to help us unlock commercial innovation and public sector innovation to deliver value and impact for everyone. And I think the process here is we must do this together, I think is the kind of starting point. And we were very fortunate, I think, in the approach we took was very open in terms of where we solicited input from, and there were over 100 contributors who gave us feedback, and our brief to them was very much to be a critical friend in that process, and that's something that we would like to continue as we go forward. There's a few different elements of this I think I want to be very clear about. There's publicly derived health relevant data from areas such as NHS and DWP, the Home Office and so on. These are quite out of scope for us. I want to be very clear about that. We're really looking at the private sector and commercial and non-commercial actors who, whether it's through apps or related services, as soon as data is used for some kind of health and care process, it becomes health and care data. So as this sort of digital exhaust from all of these different sources comes to bear from the health and wellness industry, from wearables and so on, we need a better way of managing the process of making that data usable, but without undermining trust in the process. Now, the good news is that we've got some blueprints and examples to build upon. I just want to touch briefly on them. Firstly, within the UK, we've got the open banking standard. Now that has created a blueprint for us in terms of consent management and the ability to transfer personal data between institutions and organizations, whether or not they're commercial or otherwise, but with the explicit opt-in consent of the user. And that process is now being used by millions of people across the UK and has enabled large-scale interoperability across hundreds of commercial vendors. Now, in the mix there's a consent process. There's also a liability process. And the liability transfer and the data rights processes are really central to this kind of thinking. There's a lot of public, through the consultation that we ran, there's a lot of public concern about the misuse of data by the commercial sector. And there's a lot of concern in the commercial sector itself about trying to do the right thing. We can't assume that the commercial sector is a bad actor in this context. There's a lot of very important projects that need access to information, but we want to make sure that we can build that trust framework out so that people have confidence in the process of data sharing, but also in the process of what happens when something goes wrong, because things will go wrong. We have to also make some grown-up assumptions that whether through positive or negative intent, mistakes will be made. So we need processes around that to make sure that we can address things when challenges arise. So I think there's the open banking is one of the blueprints we've built upon. Another is the BEIS smart data strategy, which is very aligned with the national data strategy. We're trying to make sure these things are connected for the simple reason that if we don't make things connected, it's going to get more complicated. And I think there's a kind of core mantra here of today's the simplest it's going to be. And so the more we can do to help bring interoperability between systems, but also cohesion across the market, so that we're trying to do things in similar or in the same ways, will make it easier for us as individuals to understand what on earth is going on with our data, where is it coming from and where is it going to. So there's a number of different threads there that we're trying to pull together. And I think here in the report, we've tried to articulate a lot of questions. And so to help us navigate through that, because it's very difficult. There's a lot of conversations I've experienced over the years of hypothetical concerns. So right at the heart of our thinking here was, let's pick some use cases. Let's pick some examples and then walk them through and see what happens when we challenge people to particular case studies or particular applications against their approach or their particular use case. And so with that, I'd like to pass on to one of those examples, the eRed Book for Life.
Right. So let me introduce the idea, and then I'm going to quickly hand over to Michael Catania, who's going to talk about the specifics. I want to give some context real quick in terms of what we're trying to do here. What Gavin was talking about was trust and people having trust in where data goes and how it's handled and what it's used for. And one of the things that has been used successfully in in a health setting is the Red Book. When we're born, we record our height and weight of the baby, and then for some reason we stop after a while. There's an opportunity to take a life course approach to our health and well-being, not stop when we're a year or 2 years old, whenever one might stop recording in the ebook, but it eventually stops. And frankly, there's data that we need to be capturing about our wellness throughout our entire well-being, throughout our entire life, not just at the beginning of life. And so the concept of the Life Book, or the eRed Book for Life, was put forward as a part of the context, and the idea was to leverage on what we have and build on that. So The paper version of the Red Book has been recorded and put into a digital format called the e-Red Book. And what we're proposing to do is take a life course approach to the way that we age. And so Michael has a very specific use case around weight management. We capture height and weight when we're born. Let's carry on that throughout our life. The BMI index is something that people are familiar with and is well established in BMA journals. So there's lots to talk about there. Let's I'll hand over to Michael and let you go over further from there, Michael.
Thanks, Eric. Just bear with me a second and I'll bring up the slides that we were going to present today. Okay, so thanks for the intro, Eric, and good morning, everyone. So I think just picking up where Eric left off, I'll talk you through some of our thinking on the Red Book for Life concept and what we're starting to call the Life Book. And as Eric was saying, that's very much about extending the concept of the Red Book. It provides a summary of a child's health interactions in the first 5 years of their life and extend that into a lifelong health companion that's aggregating our health interactions with both the statutory and commercial sources to collate a rich data set of information about ourselves that can aid us in living longer, healthier lives and support partnership working with health and care services. I think what you'll see over the course of this presentation is that we've identified weight management as an ideal use case for advancing the goal of achieving 5 healthier years of life. So I think, first just a little bit on the e-Red Book. What is the e-Red Book for children aged 0 to 5? And at the core of it, for us, what's really important with our approach to patient engagement is this concept of a partnership record, a shared space for collaboration between health professionals and citizens. For parents, that means that they have a complete record of their child's immunizations, have a tailored source of reliable and trusted information, and a guide that ensures that they're following the Healthy Child program. For professionals in the health system in turn, there's the benefit of knowing patients are following the program, that parents are able to provide a complete record of their child's health. And during COVID, we were using it to effectively support remote consultations to great effect and enable direct public health messaging into the app. But on a broader perspective, the goal has always been to have a cohort of patients who are coming through the NHS who have a copy of their own health record, and that then goes with them through the life course and onto the different care pathways that they'll enter as they go through their health journey. So this view is showing you where the e-Red Book 0 to 5 is at today. And at present, the data sourced from the NHS is entered by parents directly. What we don't have at the minute is sources of information that are coming in from the commercial sector. And at present, only have a core focus on immunizations, screening, weight monitoring, and health guidance. What we're now beginning to consider is how open life data could contribute to and enrich this data set, particularly around weight management and healthy eating for the family. So we heard George Freeman say yesterday at the launch of the report that the kind of health economy envisioned by the open life data framework will need to be built from the grassroots up. And our approach is to find those touch points between the health system and the individual, where open life data can underpin partnership working, helping to advance the goals of the long-term plan by helping and nudging people to make healthier lifestyle choices. So the core elements of the Healthy Child program reoccur in adult health programs later on in life. There are defined NHS schedules for routine screening and health checks for older adults, just as there are for the Healthy Child program. Adult programs like the Healthy Child program encourage people to take responsibility for their own health and well-being. And that's why we selected weight management as our use case to explore as part of the Open Life Data report, building on proof of concept work we've been undertaking with NHS Grampian. So we identified weight management as a strong touch point for interaction between the health system and sources of data derived from outside of it. Citizens and health professionals can come together and work in partnership to set and track weight management goals. This is a particularly pertinent challenge. As we saw in the framework report, 85% of the factors determining our health lie outside of the formal health and care system, and obesity-related illnesses are costing the NHS $6 billion a year. So this slide here represents the user journeys we were testing, but I think the key thing to highlight and emphasize is the prompt to download the app and actually connect your health data is coming from the health system, which is a great source of trust for the citizenry. In the context of the Open Life Data Framework, we think this is a way to reduce barriers to the sharing of health information as it is tied into a course of treatment, setting goals and targets that effectively gamify people into managing their weight. We think over time, partnership working of this kind will normalize the collection and sharing of health data and bring us closer to public acceptance of broader data capture around things like our digital exhaust. So with this graphic, we're showing you the patient journey and the different tiles and tools that they're able to use in managing their weight. This view is showing you a manual entry data point, which we found with the eRedBook is still important functionality. It provides a route to capturing highly valuable health data where patients might not necessarily have Fitbits or smart scales. Inbuilt, excuse me. And then in this view, we're showing you a more automated view where a patient is able to set their own goals and then track it. And it shows you how patients can track their weight management and monitor that against data that's, in this instance, captured from a Fitbit. And that data is coming to us via an integration with Scotland's Health Data Exchange. This data is then being stored in the Lifebook repository and shared with the clinician via a Lifebook Pro interface. Moving forward, we'll be integrating directly with the Apple Toolkit to bring in an additional and much richer data set. With this view, we're then showing you the professional experience of the Lifebook Pro interface, where a clinician can manage their caseload and interact with the patient through the app. There, they can work with the patient to set goals, agree activities, record notes, and then store these in the patient record. And what's key to us with this is that in sessions or remotely, health professionals can track activity against targets set, provided that consent has been given by the patient. And why we think this is important is this concept of monitoring progress remotely and enabling targeted and trusted health guidance relevant to the patient to be sent to them. All of this, of course, has the overall aim of reducing pressure on the health system as it is now and prompting people to manage their weight so as to avoid less intensive and costly interactions with the health system at a later point in time. And then just to finish off, we have a quick overview of the data flows in the eRedBook or the Lifebook. eRedBook works to something that we call the publish and subscribe model. So we subscribe at present to regional or national data hubs that publish data, which is then stored locally in an eRedBook data store. We also integrate with different identity services and enable consent management within the app. So in the context of the Open Life Data Framework, we believe this model leaves Lifebook well placed in future to act as a repository for what in effect will become our digital twin. It will be the focal point where we aggregate our data and manage our interactions with the kind of health economy that's envisioned by the Open Life Data Framework.
Thank you very much, both. And I'd like to move straight on to Civic Data Cooperative now. Gary.
Hi, everybody. Let me just share my screen. How is this working?
Michael, you may need to unshare your screen, please. Michael, you could disable
okay. I think I got it right. Okay, here we go.
We've got it.
Fantastic. Is it? Oh, it's gone up again, hasn't it? Let me just try again.
We can see it now, Gary.
You see it now? Okay, fantastic. I'll get started. So, hello everybody, and thanks for the invitation to present today. I'm going to be talking about the Civic Data Cooperative, which is based in the Liverpool City region and was funded by the Combined Authority, the Metropolitan Mayor there, to look at how we can make better use of our civic data, our health and care data across the region, mixed with in order to improve really the health and well-being of our population and improve the economic status of the city as well. So what I want to do is just very quickly ask you to imagine, what that future might look like. Because one of the challenges that we do have is, these are quite esoteric topics, and we all have, I think, different views of what this might be in terms of a vibrant data environment that enables our data to work for us is the objective. I think that it's captured very well in the presentation that we've just seen, what those benefits might be. And I think one of the things that we do recognise is that this does need to be based on a collaborative and open approach within our region. But what we want to do is to support people or companies, organisations within the NHS and local authorities to be able to use their data to understand how they can best translate lived experience, what actually happens to people, into data, into insight that can then be used in order to be able to deliver that innovation in a way that's measurable, so we can understand whether it has the impact that we actually expect or not, and improve it if not. And finally, to be able to, if we're using data in this way, recognize that our use of that data needs to be ethical. It needs to be inclusive. We can't exclude people who don't have the same level of access or ability to understand what is happening to their data right now. We need to understand how we can sort of level up people's capabilities within digital. And this is a very complicated space, this sort of stakeholder map for our environment that we're working in shows, we need to take a multidisciplinary approach. We are building on existing projects such as CIPHER to sort of help to bring together colleagues from across the NHS, in particular directors of public health and so on, who need access. But there is a wider ecosystem as well around regulation, information governance, what standards come from NHS Digital and NHS England in terms of the impact that they have on us that we need to be aware of. So we need that kind of cross-sector ownership. But also, obviously, we need to consider patients and residents' needs and wants as well. So, reflecting back, a few years, the Connected Health Cities project that I worked on helps Mrs. Joy's asking these types of questions around should the NHS be allowed to use data in this way after it's been sort of de-identified or anonymised. And a number of these projects and questions have been asked now, and the answer seems fairly clear. Yes, of course we should. Patients are surprised that we're not using data more effectively, that we're not using it to help them a bit more. But while certainly in these juries, we saw that shift from people who were doubters to being more positive about the use of data, it's also important to highlight that those people who were very open about their data being shared and the people who...
No, this page is supposed to be called What Do I Do?
Oh, if other people on the call, can you make sure you're on mute, please?
So I'll just say that people who were very open to the idea of data sharing, that didn't have any in mind, as they learned more about it, actually became more cautious. Not that they didn't want their data to be shared, but they understood more about the risks that were involved. And we need to also therefore recognise that this is not simply about moving straight to let's just share all the data and make it available. We have to think very carefully about what that means. And working with colleagues in Ada Lovelace who've developed this spectrum of participation, we need to be able to sort of make sure that we have tools that reach across this whole space, but move us from simply informing patients about what we're doing or consulting with our residents about what they want, to making sure that we have appropriate techniques for involving and collaborating and ultimately empowering our residents in terms of how the data are used. And I think there are important lessons here for the commercial sector as well, in terms of what we're expecting in that space in between the sort of like the civic and the private space, and how those interact. What may be appropriate for a private app that is collecting data to help us with our own sort of fitness. Those requirements may be quite different if they suddenly become linked more closely to our health. In terms of Liverpool, this is also based on sort of activity that sort of came out of COVID. So we're working very closely with the CIPHER programme. CIPHER was instrumental in bringing together a data set that was used to help us underpin the planning and support and research around the first mass testing in asymptomatic testing centres. That was important, obviously informing government policy. and that now continues to support the system in terms of how it uses and thinks about data. But being developed under COVID times, you know, we recognise that it was an emergency situation that we now need to go back to our residents and start talking to them about how should this continue and how may it continue. And that's now also being spread more widely across the UK, so we can better share use cases and knowledge with other areas, particularly around how we engage with things like trustworthy research environments and share that. Which means that we're now sort of thinking about, well, what must be true, you know, in order to enable these things to happen going forwards, that we have a social license, that we have clearly identified benefits, and those benefits outweigh the risks. You know, that things must be measurable, that there must be clearly defined rules for ethical use. And so we're starting to build up these maps that allow us to identify where things are desirable, where they are viable and feasible and sustainable, to help us to map out and address those issues. So in terms of data action latency, we have this need to reduce the time to impact of these types of innovations, but recognising that systems have to be resilient to these types of public health challenges through access, which is transparent and clear, processes which allow us to share code and data and insights, and support the learning health system activity that we're looking to deliver. Thank you very much.
Super, thank you very much, Gary. And again, any questions, please do add them in as we're going along, and we'll come to them in the panel session as well. Moving on now to the Health and Longevity Data Exchange. Svetlana.
Thank you, Gavin. And I will be presenting today Health and Longevity Data Exchange. My name is Svetlana Sorodina. And I just would like to start with a bit of personal story. 6 years ago, when I presented at Open Data Institute Summit Lean Innovation Framework that my company used, there was an event dedicated to health data. And I have to say, before that event, even though we as a company worked with health data, in particular medical data, system engineering software, for me personally, aging was something that happens to other old people, and health was mainly related to medicine, syringes, probably a lot of blood involved. So that's not something I was particularly excited about. So in this session, there was a discussion about how we can actually treat health as an ongoing journey that starts from early age, and how it is really the question that impacts all societies and everyone involved. And it's a really fundamental opportunity that we can use open data to create systems around data sharing and integration. And I was slowly involved in this topic in the area. I was really excited about the space, quantify itself, use of data, understanding of human journey as something we can really look at in preventive sense. So 6 years forward, I was very honored to join Aging Research at King's, ARK, as an entrepreneur in residence. And I have to say I was delighted that this organization exists, and I was happy to be part of it, because the approach ARK takes, it really takes aging outside of the domain of some isolated, limited group question, and really brings it up to the important spotlight that it has to occupy. And it's really about interdisciplinary research and collaboration, in particular between industry and academia, public and private sector, as Rita and all other speakers today mentioned. And it's really an effort that needs to unify all various skill sets, standpoints, and interest areas in order to succeed. So it's a really exciting collaborative space where we have been working to deliver innovation commercialization projects that takes the best from the academia into solid research, evidence-based design, but also applies that to real-world problems and deliver the results in market-optimized, innovative way. I'm also the CEO and managing director of a company called Skane for the last 12 years. We've been building lean startup technology innovation and software solutions for large enterprise, academia, but also small scale up and fast growing startups. So with that in mind, we brought together some of great minds and great team around building the concept of health and longevity data exchange, so-called Longevity Innovation Valley, where we are looking at taking the key concept of preventive health and making sure that the ecosystems that we develop focused on prevention, on engaging individual user participation, using technology and software to enable prediction and personalization, precision of preventive treatments. And it's also from economic standpoint, how do we make sure that any solutions that we introduce really operate on market level, and not necessarily one-off program, but we can develop that as an ecosystem in longer term in the future. And while we have been working on this project framework, we highlighted several areas that we need to make sure are we're focusing on to make the system efficient and make sure it scales. So it's about engagement of individual and making sure that trust and security and privacy is paramount, as many speakers today have mentioned. That it's really about collaboration, of course, sharing data, providing evidence for any interventions, developing biomarkers. So we're not really focusing on age as a number based on when people were born, but the actual health and wellness-driven indicator that we can use here. And of course, using the precision and personalization aspect, we really can reach out to underserved, underrepresented groups, in particular, older people who are severely underrepresented, for example, UK Biobank right now, but also many digital health and many interventions are focused on younger, more technologically savvy audiences. So we want to make sure that we really cover all the underserved groups of people in the society. So for the pilot projects, what we were aiming to do is to start with diet as one of the important determinants of our health, and scale up towards all the exosomes that impact personal health. So as part of our phase 1 pilot, we're connecting health data using epigenetics and biomarkers with food basket data information that can give us an indication of how healthy people eat and how the basket and the diet is related to health ultimately, but also importantly, how we can improve that, how we can make sure, but by changing diet, we actually help people to live longer, healthier lives. So looking from that perspective, we have the ecosystem of different market players, and we need to make sure that we address interest and motivators of all of them in order to create lasting change. We're looking at retailer and food manufacturers, at health data providers and analytics, of course, individual at the core. We also look at some very interesting marketplace such as insurance, and later today we'll be welcoming a few insurance companies as well, and food data manufacturers to get their view of how they can help and how they can participate in the creating healthier, longer lives for society. So, and just a few areas we're addressing with the project, and specifically concentrating on is solving trust and privacy. And during this week, a lot of conversation was about consent. How do we ensure that the individual actually is in control of anything that happens with their data? And of course, the problem here is that with health data, it can get really, really complex. So it's probably even a simplification to say that that's all the kind of levers and buttons an individual has to press and control in order to make sure all the relevant data points go to right direction and making sure the consent is given adequately. So it's really complicated, and instead of trying to give that responsibility to individual, we looking at ways, for example, of implementing decentralized learning, where on the left-hand side you see the traditional architecture, on the right-hand side it's a software approach with federated learning, where data actually never leaves the data holder, data repository, and the algorithms that comes to the to the data hold in order to train the model. Second challenge we are solving is evidence and motivation for individuals, and we're doing it with data evaluation models, in particular approaches such as shapely value valuation in machine learning systems. I won't be keeping for long here. I'm very conscious about time, just to want to make sure we go back to schedule. The third challenge, engagement. It's very easy to dream about an ideal system, an ideal front end for a user to give them all controls, but in reality, it would be really hard to enforce. People have their established routines, established ways how they do things, processes, so just creating this ideal, perfect platform probably wouldn't work. And instead, we're focusing on very simple value indicators that could be integrated into already existing front ends, apps, systems, where we can use that as a single way to impact decisions and optimize decision-making process. Lastly, we are bringing the commercial design thinking and lean innovation frameworks back to this problem, and we're bringing academic thinking and commercial applications in this unified framework, where we do interactive sessions, sprint-based innovation brainstorming to develop use cases around combining food and health data and biomarker data. We're currently in setting up the trials. We have architecture and technologies in place. It's based on AWS system, so it's cloud-based federated machine learning algorithm. And we work with a few great companies, including insurance, epigenetic data provider, and food data analytics companies to help us develop use cases and implement pilots. So with that, I will finish, but we very welcome collaborators, partners, so do get in touch if you're interested in conducting a trial or participating in data research. Thank you,
Svetlana. That's great. If I can invite all the panelists now to switch their videos back on, we'll move into the panel discussion. I'm going to kick off with some of the questions we've already had in the Q&A. But as we go through this, please do just ask any questions. There are no stupid questions here, so please ask anything you wish. So first question was, how does the eRed book work when people move abroad for periods of their life? Would it allow people to maintain their data collection in other national contexts? So maybe, Michael, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the first point to make is, you know, that the data in the eRed book's persisted. What you've collected so far will travel with you wherever you go, and the facility to collect it yourself will remain. In terms of the architecture that's underlying the eRed book, certainly the potential to integrate with other publish and subscribe and data aggregation engines exists. What we would be dependent on if, say, you were going to Australia is whether they have the infrastructure in place that you can connect to and continue to draw that data into the app so that you're pulling in your health data from multiple different sources.
Super. And then linked to that, the second question is, how is Lifebook different to other apps like Fitbit trying to track and monitor health and integrating with healthcare already? What's your sense there?
Sure. Well, I suppose we heard George Freeman talk about it yesterday when he made his introduction, saying there's, you know, we've got Strava and Fitbit and all these different data collection apps, but they're sitting in their silos at the minute. And, you know, some healthcare economies will have made some interactions, others won't. The goal with Lifebook really is to integrate with as many of these as possible and aggregate them in a single location. So referring back to the first question, if I did happen to move abroad or to a different geography that has a different shared care record, for instance, and they wanted access to this data, I would have a single point, a single gate by which I can share that with them. And I think the other point to emphasize with something like a Lifebook is that it's not really just about the collection of your data, but the managing of your consents, which comes out very strongly in the report. And that then becomes quite interesting, because how is it that you manage the UI for the user? Is it something like my banking app that shows me all the different categories of my spending? But then within that, there's still a lot of variation in the data. How much of it do I want to share? And then you start thinking about it, and it gets you potentially into the realm of things like data trust, of do I actually outsource my decision making to the Lifebook to say, right, these are the broad parameters by which I'm comfortable sharing my health data, and now I trust you as a trusted app to manage that on my behalf.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to come to Tina now. This question of should business play a greater role in taking responsibility for measuring and understanding the impact of workplace on individual health and well-being, and to what extent is this desirable? It's a great question.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really great question. Well, obviously, you know, our whole focus in this report is how can we access and share private sector derived health relevant data. And I do encourage everyone to read the Nature article that we quote in the report, which is the base of how we define health relevant data, because I think definitions are really important and getting the terminology and the language right in all of this. But I think, in answer to the question, I think businesses have and should take a much greater role actually in the responsibility for population health. I mean, I think some of you will know, and this is actually in the report, in parallel, there is some work going on with the CBI and many other partners developing a business framework for health, with a view to developing a business index and 3 core parameters, one of which is actually the role of business in workplace health. And some of the stats that I know have been in some recent reports from the CBI, for example, is that business could actually reduce the burden on health and social care by 10 to 20% by taking a more active role in intervening, for example, in musculoskeletal and mental health conditions, which is quite obvious. So mental health is a massive area where business could and should play a much greater role. And we know that many of the big companies obviously have very well-established health and wellness programs. There are issues around engagement and taking responsibility. But just going back to the framework, the business framework for health, that of course is all completely dependent on us being able to access and share private sector data. So this work of the Open Live Data Framework is obviously very much informing that. So the second pillar of the business framework for health is products and services. So for example, the work that Svetlana and Co and indeed the Red Book for Life, you know, this is all about accessing private sector data from organizations who are in this space of products and services to keep us healthy and well. And then of course, the final bit, which of course is a nice segue for what the Civic Data Cooperative and the CIFA program is all about, is the wider role of business, even potentially being an anchor institution in the wider context of integrated care systems, which of course is where we're moving to, is how do we involve business in communities, community resilience, and the wider impact of business in population health. We have to get out of this idea that health just belongs to health and social care. It is a much bigger thing. I'll stop there.
No, great. Thank you very much. Next question up here. If there's any responses to that from our other panelists, please just put your hand up and I'll bring you in. Otherwise, I'll move to the next question, which is what lessons have been learned from attempts in the past, such as Health Vault and the associated lack of engagement? So the engagement question, what's going to be different today? Maybe if I come to Gary on that one first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is an area that's really blooming at the moment, and I don't think we have a single answer, but I think organizations like ours, like the ODI, the Open Data Institute, and Ada Lovelace, just in the UK, have recognised that, you know, there is a massive imbalance in terms of the relationship between the people who kind of own and kind of manage the data and the people who the data are about. And what we are starting to see is that recognition that we need to change, both in the UK, Europe, and America, where, you know, we're sort of seeing wider adoption at the state level, you know, California, around individual rights in terms of how data are collected and used. So I think that the biggest challenge to that, obviously, is that the models that we have for datafication at the moment are primarily driven around maximizing profit and collection of data. So things like, you know, collecting, you know, use of a lamp by a child in their bedroom, you know, is turned into a potential source of profit and revenue, without really considering what the wider implications are of that. And what we have I think therefore right now is the opportunity to start actually shaping that conversation. And the idea of data ethics seems like a relatively new one. I think it's really just emerged in the last year or so. I think recognizing things like bias in AI and the challenges that creates. And I think while it could be seen as a potential risk in terms of over-regulation and kind of creating barriers to innovation, I think for me, I see this very much as being opening opportunities for, actually being able to use the data better, and therefore creating better products, involving people in the design of those products more. And that's the where we need to go. So that spectrum of participation that we're sort of looking at will be an area where we are looking to develop, if you're doing X, what are the best ways of kind of helping to inform that? And we'll be working, with companies primarily around the Northwest to help us to develop that as well. So yes, it has to be about involvement, and it has to be about recognizing the challenges. Although I do think that the biggest challenge that we face, and one of the things that's come up through Cypher, is digital exclusion. Is we've talked about the complexity of consent, for example, already, and I love that slide of Svetlana's around the panel of the aircraft, what happens to our data. I don't know. Speaking to a colleague yesterday, said that they were interviewing people about 9 things that Google may or may not do with their data. And asking people about it, and even people who are digitally savvy will only name 5 of those things. People who aren't will only name 1 or 2. But the reality is that all of those 9 things that are in that report are being done by Google. So we're not fully aware of how our data are being used, and that's probably the first thing that we need to address, is how do we educate and make more transparent the use of the data.
Thank you. I think just reflecting on that as well, and it's the responsibility of the sector to help work that out with the public and private sector to work that out, so that the end user doesn't have to. I think there's a huge burden of responsibility on those in the industry to really kind of work on that. The next question we've got here is about, what about blockchain for healthcare data? Flip the data ownership around. I'm going to take this one because I think it's blockchain gets mentioned a lot. I'm a massive fan of the technology, but not for this use case. I don't think it applies at all. I think also it's a technology, and it's not about data rights. It's not about ownership. Ownership of data is a very complex area and is not determined by the technology. It's determined by the application, and it's determined by the frameworks that sit around it. So very central to the Open Life data framework here is the process of consent management. Again, reflecting on what we've already built in the UK around open banking. We've got all the technology we need to provide robust, decentralized and distributed consent management. There may be applications where blockchain can provide a use at some of those edge cases, but certainly I personally wouldn't be putting any personal data near any blockchain for a very, very long time. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on that, but I can see some nodding from the panel. Let me move on. In the interest of time, then maybe let's move on to the next question. In our opinion, then, what is the best efficient official institution really working now in a European country for citizens to share data for medical research? So FinData in Finland, but what's the view from the panel there? It's one of the interesting questions that was raised in the consultation. Who's involved in this? Tina, do you want to have a go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Of course, we're very mindful in the Open Life Data Framework. We focused it quite specifically on the UK context, but of course, data is everywhere, across borders and all the rest of it. And there are some really interesting organizations and institutions internationally. In fact, when Nigel Hughes actually presented from his perspective at Janssen, the work that they're doing with the European Health Data Evidence Network, which again is an open federated network. So there are really interesting groups, internationally, which are looking at how do we access health data to also, essentially focus on health and well-being rather than just on the sort of sickness end of things. And we also know that there are some really, really interesting initiatives And I think Finland is mentioned in the question. So Finland, Sitra are doing some really, really interesting work, looking at human-centered data economies, and working with the EU to sort of, in this new sort of digital economy. So I think, going back, I think to what George Freeman was talking about yesterday in this new economy, I think we have to see everything that we're doing in this open view of the world and the data view of the world, and how in the end we can develop propositions to essentially make our lives better. And how do we do that is really at the heart of the question, given the scenarios and many of the constructs at the moment, which potentially are perversely aligned actually to that goal. So this is what we're trying to unpick. So I guess, so I think there's lots of initiatives to this open approach. Even if you look at the vision in the NHS draft health and social care strategy, data saves lives, it's all moving towards this open approach. So it's really working out what are the pain points. And obviously what we've really focused on in this framework is, and this is, there's a cultural context to this, of course, in the UK, where we're very attached to the NHS and social care, and it's a wonderful institution, but actually that's one of the cultural issues we have to address as a nation, is how do we actually get and break apart from this notion that it is the only part of the solution to help us keep healthy and well. It is absolutely not. So that's a cultural context very prevalent in the UK, which is slightly different in other countries like Estonia, for example. It's a totally different system where the citizen, as part of their e-citizen program, they are in charge and decide who they share their data with. They have and it's very secure encrypted technology. And so it's a very, very different relationship. And of course, the trust relationship with government is different as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to close out the panel with one question, which I'd like to spring on panelists at the very end, which is, if you could ask for one thing, if you had a magic wand and you wave it, what's the one thing that you would like to see? So I'm going to pounce on Eric first, and then Svetlana.
Well, it builds on what you were just talking about there, actually. Trust is the key issue and sharing of data in all of these. And, Tina walked through some of the options that are there. But to be honest with you, I kind of like the idea of data trusts, or at least new institutions with new structures that doesn't have to be within an existing organization. So, if I could wave a magic wand, people would share data, come together and share data for a specific use case, but it would be done in a way that would be outside of existing structures. It would be done in an ethical, secure way, but
Super. Thanks, Eric. I'll go to Svetlana, and then to Michael, then Gary, then Tina. So Svetlana.
I would say trust as well, but in a bit different way. I would say we would need more trust of people in the fact that they can take control of their health, that they can change situation for the best, either situation for themselves or for the society. And I think a bit more trust in our capabilities as humanity as a whole. And I think then we can, of course, make happen all the great things such as engagement and data sharing and integrated systems, a bit more confidence, I would say.
Yeah, I suppose trust always jumps out, but I think the thing for me is we talk about interoperability a lot, but there's often an elephant in the room, which is that some suppliers don't always want to share their data. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would somehow make them share that. So these visions that we're talking about can be made real much sooner than later.
Super. Gary?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because there's so many things, the things, trust, standards, openness, for us to add something to that. I think it would be, we need to rethink, I think, some of the bases for things like information governance and data protection, away from what is quite a reactive and negative environment to something that it reinforces that these are positive choices, and sort of overcomes some of the dark patterns that we do see in how data are being used.
Great. And finally to Tina.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we've tried to do is create a trustworthy system to generate that trust That's really what we focused on. And I really hope to get away from this sort of that it tends to be this them and us between public and private sector. If we're purpose-led, action focused around, you know, what we're all trying to achieve here, which as the APPG, it's 5 extra years of healthy life expectancy while critically minimizing health inequalities, you know, and have the right frameworks around that, we can achieve big things for the benefit of people.
Yeah, great. So I'd just like to close out now and echo a lot of the sentiment here, is that this really has to, my one thing is we all need to do this together. It needs to be a really concerted public-private development process here that involves people who look after the rights of the individual citizens. So with that, I will close us out, and thank you to our panelists and presenters, and back to you, Richard.
Thanks, thanks, Gavin. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Let me come back on screen myself. Hopefully you can see me, at least hear me. So I'm going to add to the chat again for everyone the link that Tina mentioned at the beginning to the APPG for Longevity Open Life Data Framework report. So that's in the chat. Please do have a look at that.